And go ahead and dismiss all those notifications. And also want to warn you all that I'm dog sitting 3 dogs at this moment. So if you hear like a sudden outburst, that's probably one of them. So thanks for your patience on that. So today I'm going to give a brief update on our watershed health dashboard. And basically I'm going to very quickly go through the assessment framework. It's not going to be a very detailed update today, but specifically what we were working on were these watershed condition indicators, and then some preliminary, they are not finalized at all, and you'll see why, maps of these watershed condition indicators. Kind of summarize all the work that we've done to this point, and then talk about some of the sticking points that will lead into our presenters today. So the next slide. Just as a reminder, we had a 2013 assessment of watershed health across all of California. It was published in a report that's on our Healthy Watersheds website. And watershed health was measured as 3 separate assessments: watershed condition, stream health, and watershed vulnerability. And our technical advisory committee for the dashboard decided to tackle watershed condition first, which is the degree, or sorry, next slide. Which is the degree to which certain structural characteristics of the watershed with regard to aquatic ecosystems are in their natural or pre-settlement state. On the next slide, you'll see that this is analogous to the landscape condition attribute of US EPA's Healthy Watersheds initiative. I bring up this figure because you might see it a lot today. It's the kind of the foundation of our work and part of the foundation of our other group's work today as well. So our watershed condition assessment is really designed to reflect that landscape condition attribute, whereas stream health was really designed to look at those other 5 attributes as well. Next slide. So each assessment is comprised of different indicators. And for now, we decided to stick with the 6 indicators here in green for watershed condition that also comprised the same assessment in 2013. And today I'm going to show you some very preliminary maps and updates of these 6 indicators that I've been working on. On the next slide, we have the preliminary map of percent natural cover, and let me orient you to what you're seeing here. So on the left side is the preliminary map that I have newly created using the updated data. And on the right is the published map for the same indicator in the 2013 assessment. The worst condition will always be the lighter color, and the better condition will always be the darker color. I used the Veridis color palette in R because it's relatively similar to the palette in the 2013 assessment. So the colors look a little bit different, but they should follow the same general scheme. All of the values here and what you're seeing mapped here are catchments where there's 1 polygon per reach, essentially, and it's the land area that drains directly to a single reach. In California, there are about 140,000 catchments, according to the NHD+2, the National Hydrography data set that we use. And there's about 135K in NHD plus version 1, which is what was used in the 2013 assessment. So that's an addition of like 5K new polygons from the last assessment, which I think is interesting. Also, the script that was used to create these maps are in our project GitHub, which is linked at the bottom of the slide. I've yet to add all the data sets to that GitHub project because we're hoping to use APIs and not just these source data sets. And also, many of these data sets are really large. So if there's a data set that you want to download and play with based on the script that I have there, please let me know and I'd be happy to get it to you. Also, as we are updating all of the data involved, we don't expect the maps to look exactly the same as the 2013 assessment. However, we do expect them to be relatively similar based on the data used, and we can use the 2013 maps, again on the right, as a kind of visualization check to coarsely examine whether the data that we're plotting looks correct. On the next slide, I'm also going to pair this with the data that we're currently using at the top. So to make the newer map, this is the National Land Cover Database 2016 that's available on StreamCat, whereas the 2013 assessment used the same database except using 2006 data. So that's why another reason you might see some slight changes in these overall maps. Is there a question in the chat? So I'm going to double check. Oh no, we're good. Okay. Next slide, please. And so our next indicator, the second indicator, is percent intact active river area. And we have not developed this map yet, but we've been in contact with the Nature Conservancy, which has the toolbox to produce this data. It's a little bit more complex than just bringing the data into R and then doing some spatial calculations and mapping it. There is a specific toolbox that TNC uses in order to do that. And we're hoping that we can partner with them in order to get this data done. On the next slide, you can see, again, the data updates for that. It won't go into the specifics here, but basically updating from NHD plus version 1 to version 2, as well as the land cover data as well. Next slide. This is sedimentation risk, our third indicator, and this is obviously the calculation that I feel the least confident about. And you can see on the next slide, it's confusing because many of the landscape values in our sedimentation risk calculation haven't changed. For instance, like soil factors like R and K factor that go into the calculation of sedimentation risk and catchment slope, those things shouldn't change between 2013 and now. So I'm still investigating what's going on with this particular indicator. We also discussed in the last TAC meeting how optimal it is to have a qualitative low to high value indicator that's based on sedimentation, as sediment can be a pollutant, but also natural sediment deposition is inhibited by hydrologic barriers. So we're still deciding the usefulness of this indicator as well as working out the calculation for the updated assessment. Next slide. We have percent artificial drainage area. This is defined as the percent coverage of agricultural ditches or tile drainage in agricultural areas. And it's already obvious if you look at Southern California, we're missing some data there. Not quite sure what's going on, but that's an obvious part of the QA/QC process that we need to look into. On the next slide. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to cue you in there, Allie. And then it's a little bit confusing as to why we're missing that data because the source data of these data sets are really the same. So this data is based on geospatial data that was actually collected in the early 1990s and hasn't been updated since. So this is a data set that I'm going to continue to work on with our TAC. Next slide. We have a preliminary map for dam storage ratio. It's the ratio of normal storage in a catchment to its mean annual stream flow. And many of the catchments here obviously do not have annual stream flow data. Those are the gray areas that are not applicable. And that's based on stream flow data that's available in NHD plus version 2. On the next slide, you can see that the data source for dam storage has changed between the 2013 data set and the current data set, but I was unable to find equivalent information from the 2013 data set in DWR's website, in part because the link from the 2013 assessment was broken. So I've had to do a little bit more work to find those values and then apply that to catchments here. So for now, we're using whatever is nationally available within StreamCat as opposed to the state available data that was used in 2013. And then the next slide, again, kind of one of the more simpler data sets, we have road crossing density. And as we know on the next slide, California, like everywhere else, is getting more developed over time. And so you can see that here, we've got more road crossing developments happening in the current data set as opposed to the 2013 data set. That's actually based on values that were collected in 2002. So to review, what I just showed you very fast and very quickly was that we've developed 5 indicator maps. We're really working on one from TNC. And 3 of these 5 maps have like these data and methods that really need to be QA/QC'd further before we think they're anywhere close to finalized. And we're communicating with the TAC in order to discuss these fine scale data details. But the good news is we've identified the data, we've put it into R, we're just kind of adjusting to make sure that it's the data that we want for these indicators. And then that's done, we can start working on APIs, which instead of having the data locally on a computer, you're sourcing it from an outside server, so that we don't have to, so that is whenever that data is updated, it comes into the dashboard itself. So that's cool. It means it requires hopefully less maintenance. And then we'll also work on the Shiny app work in R. So in other words, we're getting all the data stuff done as quickly as possible. And so we're getting into like the fun dashboardy programming stuff soon too. So that's really exciting development, I think. And that's the tool that you all are looking forward to using. So kind of as I was reviewing all of this metadata for this work, working in R to recreate and visualize these indicators and examine the justification for each of these indicators in the 2013 assessment, I came up with a few larger scale sticking points that, while not necessarily relevant to finalizing these maps, I didn't want to put to the wayside either. So on the next slide, I've outlined some of those sticking points, which includes like the age of the data. So some of this makes sense. We wouldn't expect, as I said, soil factors to change significantly over time. However, I can't say that like the same thing would be true of, for instance, agricultural infrastructure that might impact watershed hydrology. So making sure, again, that we're being thorough in the data that we're using. Scale as well. Mapping 140,000 catchments on a local computer is actually quite slow. And I wonder how, well, basically, I'm thinking about how, when we scale this up to what we plan to do with the dashboard, which is you get to choose your indicators of choice. You get to choose the kind of scale you're looking at, regional or statewide. All of that takes more and more computer processing. And so we want to make sure that the tool not only is usable and relevant to your work, but also that it's fast. We don't like waiting on tools that take a long time to do processing. So within that, I've been thinking about the kinds of scales that we're looking at right now. As I said, we're looking at catchment scale for our like finest level of data. And we might want to look a little bit larger at HUCs. And though also some of our layers that we've been looking at, for instance, that we might want to bring in later for biological condition or at HUC scale, the crossover between HUCs and catchments is not exact in California. You can't just do like a spatial intersection or join. So kind of struggling with that, we'd have to find different data sets if we were to change to HUC scales as well. And then also thinking about the appropriate scales for management. Do we want to look at as fine scale as possible, essentially at that catchment data? Or is it better for management purposes, for your all purposes, to kind of look larger scale at some of the, like, for instance, sub-watershed HUCs, HUC 12, all of that kind of stuff. Also, ground truthing this data. We've talked about this in our TAC meetings. Given the known QA/QC issues that you all saw today, I was really curious about how other groups have developed ground truthing methods where the data doesn't so obviously reflect what's on the ground. And then also some social and environmental justice indicators. And we haven't tackled this as a part of the dashboard yet. It wasn't included as a part of the dashboard in 2013. There were some climate vulnerability index. I was wondering if there's been development of social vulnerability indexes as well. And since we don't currently have a model for doing this, I wanted to know whether this information fits in both assessment and input for management. Next slide, Allie.
Sorry, Corey. I'm having
Oh,
Teams
no.
issues. Hold on one second. It's
That's
trying to
okay.
bump me. Okay. All right. There we go.
Thank you. So yeah, so basically, as I'm been doing this process, I wanted to know how other watershed assessment teams have addressed these issues and more. And so the teams you'll hear from today also have this primary focus on finding and protecting healthy watersheds, and though the legislative or regulatory frameworks for them to conduct the assessment actually differ. So today, next slide, I've invited representatives from 2 water assessment groups outside of California to present on their process and join us afterwards in discussion of watershed assessment materials. So joining us a bit later today will be Pamela Toshner of Wisconsin's Department of Natural Resources in their water quality program. And she will discuss Wisconsin's Healthy Watersheds and High Quality Waters Initiative, which is essentially analogous to our Healthy Watersheds assessment and partnership. Pamela and her team have developed a technical report like we have had in 2013, but in addition, there's an action plan for implementing that report, as well as an online map viewer of their watershed assessment for the state of Wisconsin. And that exists at multiple scales. So I'm super excited for you all to hear from her. But first, on the next slide, we are going to hear from the Chesapeake Healthy Watersheds Assessment. It's a multi-state watershed assessment for drainages to Chesapeake Bay on the East Coast. So we have Renee Thompson from USGS here today. Thank you for coming. And then as well as Nancy Roth of Tetra Tech have been kind enough to talk about their assessment as well as their online tool for mapping the assessment indicators and results. And then they also have some follow-up work going on within regions within Chesapeake Bay as well. So with that, I think, excuse me, you can go ahead and stop sharing, Allie, and we can bring Renee and Nancy on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Just get
Yay.
presentation. Are you seeing the full presentation or the presenter view?
We can see the full thing. We're good.
Okay, good. I always get lost in that minor point. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Renee Thompson. I'm a geographer with USGS. I'm stationed at the Chesapeake Bay Program Office, which is actually a partnership office with several federal government agencies and nonprofits working across the Bay watershed. We're a 64,000 square mile watershed with 7 states and jurisdictions. So you can kind of see that on the right there. Excuse me, I just have a little cough. Thank you. So I'm realizing right away that you all have an amazing resource in Corey, and that she not only can do the science and application and development, but also communicate that with you all. At the Chesapeake Bay program, we often rely on contractors and small grants to fill data needs and information gaps. And so we've been fortunate enough to partner with Tetra Tech and the Chesapeake Bay Trust over the last several years to develop a lot of the information and resources. And so it is a true partnership in that way. So Nancy and I are going to tag team a little bit on this presentation today. Let me just get my slide. There we go. So those of you may not be familiar with our partnership program, but we've been around since 1983. And we are included with federal, state government agencies, nonprofit organizations. We have staff members based in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm actually visiting you today from Washington, D.C., so I have my little D.C. background on for you today. And I am the coordinator. There's several. This is our organizational structure, and I'm not going to get into it. It's very interesting and similar, actually, to a lot of the work that seems to be going on within your jurisdiction in California. We do have several goal implementation teams that are responsible for overseeing outcomes associated with the Chesapeake Bay Agreement. and I'm housed under the Maintain Healthy Watershed Goal team. So within this outcome, we're really focused on sustaining 100% of our state identified healthy watersheds and waters that are generally recognized for high quality and ecological value. And so the outcome there within the Bay Agreement is really we want to, is a very lofty goal to sustain 100% of those state identified healthy watersheds. And I think it's important that we support our state designations because we're working across multiple jurisdictions and there are different watershed programs and different definitions of healthy watersheds. It was decided early on as we worked out our management strategy that we would go ahead and support those state-based efforts and really provide a forum for shared learning and focus on developing information resources and science that can help track that progress toward the goal. So EPA, we also rely heavily on the preliminary healthy watershed assessment structure that EPA has defined in order to track and understand watershed health within the Chesapeake. And so they've defined it, you all are familiar with this, but we're looking for dynamic hydrological areas, habitat of sufficient size, i.e. forests, and connectivity within those riparian areas, also very important for healthy watersheds, as well as streams and waters that can support the physical and water quality condition that support healthy biological and in some cases, key indicator species communities, such as brook trout. So the purpose and motivation, I think, it's worth noting that the healthy watershed and other living resource outcomes related to, we have a goal of conserving 20 million acres of protected lands by 2025. We also have goals related to increasing forest, riparian buffers, and tree canopy planting. These are all what we call living resource goals, and that they don't have the regulatory teeth associated with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL that we do have in place within the region. However, in response to the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, and otherwise known as our pollution diet, where all the states and jurisdictions really have to set out a plan for reducing phosphorus, sediment, nitrogen within the bay, they are required to create water quality implementation plans. And so through that process of creating the water quality implementation, the watershed implementation plans, we're actually able in some jurisdictions to go ahead and enter healthy watershed considerations within to that. So in Maryland, for example, they use tier 2 high quality waters, and those waters are called out within the water quality implementation plan so that locals who are working on the ground understand where those watersheds are, understand the important management actions associated with them, and they can really work together to try to do what I call the yin yang, which is the water quality and the living resources side. And obviously, this is not an audience I have to tell this to, but conservation and preservation of existing high value lands and watersheds is much more economically beneficial than any type of retroactive attempt to clean up waters after they've already been degraded. So I would say it's kind of mushy in the regulatory area, but it does seem to be gaining ground, especially with the science that we're creating. This is just a little background for you so that you understand the definition varies greatly throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed. In Delaware and the District of Columbia, for example, Delaware is really focused on TMDLs and improving their very lowland areas that are primarily predominated by an agricultural land use class. And so while they're interested in increasing watershed health, they haven't actually identified any healthy watersheds. The District of Columbia is similar because of our urban environment. We do have a watershed, Fort DuPont watershed, which is part of the Anacostia, that has some large national parks, and there's a lot of national park land within it, and there's a lot of restoration efforts and planting efforts. So there's a hope for perhaps in the future with increasing trends in the positive direction that we might have some healthy watersheds in the district as well. So I think there's a few background in terms of stakeholders and rationale. I think the primary reason that we're doing this work is really driven by the Bay Agreement, and we want to be able to create some sort of indicator to assess progress toward that 100% sustained healthy watershed outcome. And so all of our folks that have signed on to that agreement are sort of our primary people that we would want to focus on. And those are our, oh, sorry, I was talking about the next slide, even though I was showing this one. And applying this is obviously to provide data to support management decisions, track condition over time as we're able to continue to reassess, as similar to what you all are doing it from your 2013 assessment. We can look at change over time, as well as looking at signals of change, and really looking at that spectrum of watershed health and where we might be seeing potential vulnerabilities, and also begin to couple associated management actions depending upon those vulnerabilities. And so our stakeholders, which I just mentioned, are kind of listed here. These are our key stakeholders. But I think anyone interested in characterization of watershed health and vulnerability, there's a lot of potential application and interest, I would say, sort of beyond a public interest. I think sometimes getting into the weeds with a public audience isn't necessarily our core audience here. This is an example of some additional folks that kind of a hybrid between management applications and additional stakeholders. I think that there's a lot of parallels and opportunity to help characterize fish habitat assessments. A lot of the work that we do with the Healthy Watersheds is really landscape-based characteristics. And so determining how best to couple that with what fish habitats need in terms of how the land is draining to them. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Source water protection and drinking water, working with local governments to identify vulnerable healthy watersheds, for example, supporting and managing protected lands, targeting of protected lands, high resilient areas or areas that may be at risk of increasing climate factors, et cetera. So the final piece before I pass it over to Nancy is to talk a little bit about scale. And I apologize if I'm getting in the weeds, but I'm trying to touch on all the points that the organizers provided with us. So I was really shocked to see that there are 120 or 140,000 catchments in California. We've got 83,000 just in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So you all are dealing with a lot there. And Corey, I think we should have you talk offline with one of our web developers, Andy Fitch, who has actually dealt a lot with rendering large data sets. It's not an expertise of mine, but perhaps he could give you some ideas. Might be worth having a more technical conversation and keep this mutual learning going back and forth. We've created a lot of information resources associated with this. And so this quick little graphic is just kind of how we nest. We do nest everything into the catchment scale. And I guess lucky for us in the Chesapeake, the Huck 12 watershed boundaries and the catchment boundaries do nest together. And so in some cases, we've got tier 2 waters, so we nest those into the catchments. In some cases, we've got tier 3 waters, and in West Virginia, we nest those. We've got Huck 12 and sort of larger blobs in some cases in Pennsylvania. And so again, we kind of, our first step is really to translate the state identified healthy watershed boundary into catchment so that then we can begin applying the metrics. So with that, I'll stop and let Nancy take over and get us back into slideshow mode. Take it away,
Okay.
Nancy.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. I'm here with my background in the Chesapeake Bay here in Maryland, and I'm going to pick up by talking about metric selection. And similar to what Corey was showing, there's a process of going through and looking at what data are available and how those can be used to form the metrics that you're looking at. So we have, for the Chesapeake Healthy Watershed Assessment, we started with the 6 categories, the same ones that you're working with, coming out of EPA's framework, and looked at metrics within each of those categories. We got input from our partners at the Bay program, from Gold Team members, and from state data contacts. We had some great participation throughout the watershed. Primarily, we're looking at using regional data sets rather than national ones for the Chesapeake assessment. And as we've gotten into our Maryland specific assessment, which I'll talk a little bit about later, we're trying to use, in addition to regional data, also state specific data. Other criteria for which metrics we're going to go forward with included how available were those data at the NHD plus catchment scale or finer scales? Did it cover the entire study area? And was there low redundancy with other potential metrics? We did look at that. And some of the metrics were not available at the catchment scale, but we feel are useful for management purposes. So in some cases, we've kind of relegated some things to saying, well, we can't create metrics out of these, but we're going to provide them as overlays for context. Things like source water protection areas that might be just a little bit different scale, cold water protection areas that might only cover a portion of the watershed, environmental justice indicators, often developed on census block kind of level scales, and also specific locations of protected lands, which might be even smaller than a catchment level. So the next slide gives an overview of some of the metrics. Here we go. In the 6 categories. So we started with the general framework, and we substituted, added, created, and similar to, it looks like what you've done, the landscape condition. This first group is covering kind of what Corey was talking about earlier. So we had things like natural land, percent forest in the riparian zone, population, housing density, mining, amount of turf grass, and historic forest loss. So those were sort of our landscape indicators. And then similarly, we had indicators in these other 5 categories representing things affecting stream health and watershed health. Oh, I also want to mention on that one, the Chesapeake Bay program has spent a great deal of effort over the last some years developing an excellent high resolution land use land cover data layer. It's available at the 1 meter scale. So that was a great resource for developing the metrics you see that are based on land cover, things like the forest, natural land, impervious cover, wetlands, and all those sorts of things. So it's really exciting, and that's the type of cover that they'll be updating through time, and it'll be a great way of integrating that new information going forward to help track some of the changes in time. Okay, so next slide then. This is just a quick snapshot. This picture happens to just show the healthy watersheds, but of course we've created the metrics for all the catchments wall to wall throughout the Bay watershed. This is the data as it's being served online, and Renee's going to walk through a little demonstration of this later on, but just wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of an overall metric there. We also developed vulnerability metrics similarly to EPA's framework. Again, we had these general categories of land use change, wildfire vulnerability, water use, and climate change, and really looking for things that might be signals, early warning signs of factors that might be influencing or causing degradation to our healthy watersheds that we really like to head off at the pass. If we have this information, the thought is that hopefully this will be useful to maybe pick up on some of those things and implement some strategies for improvement and avoiding that degradation. Next slide. So here's just an example of combining some of those. We have individual metrics for land use change, and one thing you can do is combine those into an overall picture of land use change on the left or climate change on the right. So in these cases, the darker color is those that are of higher vulnerability and higher concern, with the dark purple colors on these. Next slide. Okay, I'm just going to walk through a little example of what you can see on ours when you go in using this tool. The dot there is a point I've located, and it's in Virginia in the Shenandoah Mountain area in part of the George Washington National Forest. And you can use the online tool to take a look at anywhere in the watershed that's of interest. Get data, work with it yourself, but there's a great tool for working with it online. So I was just going to give a snapshot of some of the metrics to characterize the land conditions around this area. So here we are at Brown Mountain Creek. Again, nice area in the National Forest. The Appalachian Trail goes right through here, and great place for hiking. So if you go through, you can select various metrics to look at. This is the % forest cover in the riparian zone. You can see kind of that swath going through the middle of the land in the National Forest, a very well forested area. If you look a little bit broader context in the next picture, you'll see that influences some of the urbanized areas, some of the smaller cities and towns. That's Lexington, Virginia right there, and a little town called Buena Vista. So you can see some of that housing unit density right up against the National Forest land. And the next one, of course, you can look at degree of impervious cover. As we all know, the relationship to stream health with degradation with higher amounts of impervious cover. And then as we start looking at our vulnerability metrics, the next one is protected lands. So you can see here there's some reasonable protection in the National Forest area, but also some areas, there's some inholdings in that are maybe some good candidates for additional protections. Maybe some protections could be extended beyond what there is currently in this area to continue to protect the health of this healthy watershed here. We have some really interesting data on brook trout occurrence. This is one of our well-loved and highly valued species, indicator species here in the East. And brook trout, of course, need clean streams, clear water, and cold water conditions to be able to reproduce and persist. And this is some data that comes from USGS from the Conti Lab. And they've done some modeling of predictions of brook trout occurrence throughout the region. They've done this for the entire Northeast, so it's a great data set. We're really fortunate to be able to have this. The darker areas here are where there's a higher likelihood of brook trout occurrence. And this is the first map I'm showing here is the current occurrence of brook trout based on this metric. And then we can also look at vulnerability. They've done some modeling looking at future scenarios, say if the ambient temperature increased by 2, 4, or 6 degrees, what is going to happen to our brook trout habitat? And this is a pretty dramatic example showing the difference with the temperature change of where those brook trout areas suitable for our well-loved and appreciated trout are going to be shrinking, of course. And even in this higher elevation mountain area, there are definitely some concerns, and this is a pretty big concern throughout the cold water parts of the Chesapeake watershed. This slide gives a little sense of where we are in the process and kind of a conceptual piece of, starting with developing metrics. And what can we do with the metrics? The green boxes as you go across, one of the first very straightforward things we could do is just compare values. How are the values in the state identified healthy watershed compared to the population of catchments as a whole? Secondly, we can look at the metrics and do some statistical analyses. We've been looking at correlations. We've done a little exploratory analysis of predictions, and we're actually in the process right now of expanding on that analysis, looking at building some random forest models to look at the predictive capability of our different metrics for predicting stream health. We have great data on the biological condition of streams through many of our states do sampling programs and have extensive data sets. Maryland has over 5,000 stream samples sampled through time. So we have a Maryland Biological Index of Integrity for benthic and for fish. So we're looking at both of those right now. We're looking at the predictive capability of our metrics to predict that. We're hoping that we'll also be able to inform combination of the different metrics into an overall metric that will help with that management need to look at the overall health of our catchments and watersheds and keep them in healthy condition. And I think next slide. Yeah, with the Maryland, what we're doing is customizing what we did for the entire Chesapeake now with our Maryland pilot. We're using that predictive statistical relationships to look at in the stream conditions and whether we're able to predict them well, and developing an approach that could be replicated elsewhere. And this tool is of great interest to Maryland for their management of healthy watersheds. They get they have a process where they do project reviews and are really interested in having additional data like this to help them, again, head off those things before they become problems and stressors in a watershed. Just real quick, I'll point out a couple examples here of new data we've been looking at for the Maryland. One of the things we've been really excited about is taking the latest and greatest high resolution land cover data hot off the press. We've been working with the Bay program to incorporate the latest land cover data. And then we have other things like stream bank erosion metrics, a forest habitat metric, combining some of that new forest and land cover data. Maryland has a biodiversity conservation network. We've been integrating that data, and the ability to look at recent and projected future land change. Again, very interesting and definitely useful to be able to look at those things and start to look forward and use the data in ways to look at that. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Renee, who's going to walk through some demonstrations.
Great, thank you, Nancy. So I'm just going to take a moment here and just ask if you all could mute. There's just a little bit of a feedback. There we go, thank you. So I think this link was provided in the agenda, so you should be able to link directly to our Chesapeake Healthy Watershed Assessment, but I'm happy to provide it after I present as well. I just kind of wanted to walk you through, Nancy went through kind of the individual metrics and how you can visualize and utilize it. I wanted to walk you through a little bit of the architecture of this. So we actually worked with a different contractor after we received the initial deliverables from Tetra Tech for the first phase of the overall Healthy Watershed Assessment. They're working on the Maryland assessment now. So we've been lucky enough to work over multiple projects with Nancy and always appreciate her and her team's expertise. However, another company named Innovate Inc. Created this platform for us. They've actually done a lot of work with some other EPA platforms. The nice thing about a lot of the information that we have across our Chesapeake Bay, GIS chesapeakebay.net, is we have the ability to bring in our data from across either everywhere that we house it within our Chesapeake Bay. So, I can bring in my protected lands as an overlay, or I can look at hardened shoreline or public access or restoration opportunities. So because there's so many outcomes, it's nice to be able to kind of bring in other data to this platform. And so that is one functionality that I think a lot of folks appreciate. We also have some important reference layers in here. Just to kind of, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. This is in just outside of Shippensburg area in Pennsylvania. And you can see, if you zoom in far enough, you actually can see our state identified healthy watershed boundaries, which are kind of these blue areas. So it just gives you a sense to understand if you're looking at different boundaries, at least you have the opportunity to overlay and compare areas that maybe you wouldn't be able to because of some other sort of scale issue. The way that we've kind of designed this is a kind of nested approach where we've got our healthy watershed overall scale information, and then each of the sub-indices associated with those little boxes within that original EPA preliminary healthy watershed assessment can be viewed here. So if you want to look at the sub-indices, or you can drill down even further and look at all of the individual metrics. So just for fun, let's just turn on forest in the riparian zone. We've also created some ability to look at associated metrics. So let's say you're not like a mappy person, but you want to know what's happening here and what's being said and where is this data coming from anyway? How do I know? And so here we've created this kind of more user-friendly catchment report where it's all the same information if you click on it and look at, you know, the info, but it's just been organized in a way that might be a little bit easier to read. And then if you hover over it, each of the map tips provides you an opportunity to understand exactly what vintage or where the source of that data is. So we literally just finished our 2021-22 high resolution land use land cover data. And so we'll be integrating that in as well. It's actually 2017-18 data that has just been released this year. So my apologies for misspeaking there. In addition to that, you can also have the opportunity to generate a little PDF report. And so while there's not, I think that there's some desire from our stakeholders and end users based on some user research we did at the Bay program to allow for some more integrated analytical capabilities, similar to what Corey was talking about, where you might be able to compare two catchments against one another, or perhaps enter in your own data and rerun an assessment. We're not quite there yet, but what we do have is maybe you're going to a meeting and you want to take some information. We kind of organize this information in a way that's a little bit different and more user-friendly. Again, pulling out all the land use metrics. A lot of folks are really interested in just looking at, you know, what those are. And so we pull them out separately. And then again, you can see all of the results for the metrics in there. And then the other thing I wanted to, just trying to move this little bar here, it's on my way to, I wanted to show you is we do have some great folks on staff at the Chesapeake Bay program, including my supervisor, John Wolf, who is quite a whiz in visualization and display. And he mocked up this filtering application. And this is very much beta, but it's something that we're playing with a little bit. So kind of pre-canning some of this information. So the way that all of our catchment ranks work is they go from 0 to 1. And so let's say I wanted to look at all of the areas that had really high riparian forest cover and maybe were at least 20% protected. And so I can turn those filters on and begin to hone in on maybe some specific catchments that may meet my requirements or management application that I'm interested in. We don't have all of the metrics in here, but we have a lot of them in here. And I think that this is sort of something that we're moving into, trying to better integrate within the Healthy Watershed Assessment. But right now, it's kind of its standalone application. And then the final thing I wanted to show you, again, developed by John Wolf and some folks in our diversity work group team at the Chesapeake Bay program, are really interested in how we can be more equitable in sharing resources, dealing with justice issues in terms of access to high quality watersheds and even meaningful watershed experiences, and just really looking across some additional important social layers. And so, sorry, got myself a little bit lost here. So we have this diversity dashboard, and I can go down to environmental here, and we've got a few different ways in which different outcomes can be associated with these types of demographic information. So a lot of this information is pulled from EPA's EJ screen, which is all derived from census data. And so census data is generally at the block group scale, and we're working at the catchment scale. And so it makes it a little bit more challenging to kind of create catchment metrics of these types of indicators. But we have done, and what Nancy sort of showed you earlier, is begun to look at these overlays. And so in this example, We've got 3 different metrics that we can show in here: low income, people of color, and linguistic isolation. We're also starting to track different age groups, depending upon, maybe you want to focus on children and park access, or maybe you want to focus on elderly. And so there's some different metrics that we're also bringing in, and this gives us the ability, while it's not part of the Healthy Watershed Assessment, it makes it really easy for us to start visualizing and looking at context within these applications. And so another example of that, just the final piece of co-benefits and collaboration I want to show you is we're trying to also relate our work to other outcomes so that we can look at investing resources in areas that maybe get the most bang for our buck in terms of meeting multiple outcomes toward the Bay Agreement. And so with that, we've kind of come up with a series of management questions where we can kind of compare one data set with another. And again, our web visualization extraordinaire, John Wolf, came up with this. See in maroon here means the overlap of fish habitat and increasing development are kind of coming to a head. And so utilizing the layers within the Healthy Watershed Assessment, we can ask some very specific questions like where are important fish habitats threatened by future development? And similarly, this kind of goes back to the last example I was showing you. This was not a simple question, but do underrepresented communities have access to healthy watersheds? And so I just brought in our healthy watershed boundaries and looked at people of color and low income. And within our region, I think that people of color, maybe it could be argued, have better access than people of a lower economic income in our particular region, at least in the DMV, what we call the DC, Maryland, Virginia region. So I just wanted to kind of touch on those points. And with that, I think we were going to stop talking and open it up for discussion. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, let's go ahead and if people want to raise hands and ask, or if you want to type questions in the chat, we can take those questions there. Thank you so much. The tools that you all have developed are just incredible. And I think I hadn't seen the report aspect of that yet, but I think that's really, really cool. And I was wondering, can you get not only that report data for each reach, but also can you get that in tabular format so that you then could compare, like use that data in a different way?
No, but that's a great idea. I mean, it is all tables essentially feeding it. So just to be able to download like a CSV or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would be cool in case you wanted to do a different visualization for whatever reason. But I think a lot of our partners, that's partly what we're trying to do with some of the healthy watershed stuff here. But I think having that report itself would be so valuable for the membership. Yeah, I'll go ahead and have Allie go.
Yeah, thank you both. This was amazing work. As something that came to mind, so the slide where you were talking about potential increase in development and habitat for trout and salmonids. This is something like in my brain, I've thought, oh yeah, we can totally use that information to inform land use plans, right? Like general plans, and give that information to local municipalities to say like, hey, this area of our wherever we are county, we're going to put aside for protection because there's, using these results, we have habitat that's intact and etc. So my question is, while hypothetically that sounds like, heck yeah, we should be doing that. Do you guys have any experience with anything along those lines of this data and the results being used for land use planning or general plans, etc.?
Yeah, I think that that is definitely a goal of ours as well. And I think we've started with really identifying who those kind of key stakeholders would be that we would want to share that kind of information with. And then working with our local leadership work group, as well as a local engagement team that we have at the Bay program, they've created sort of a pathways for stakeholder engagement and communication. So we start with like, who is the audience? Who are the trusted sources? So who are the folks that audience want to hear this information from? And then who are the technical experts, you know, folks like myself and Nancy. And it's really about creating those pathways to communicate the information. And so some initial work that we're doing is we've put together a webinar series with our local engagement work group. And we're actually, we've done 2 so far, one in Maryland and one in Virginia with the APA chapters, the American Planning Association chapters. And we've gotten some really good feedback. In particular, I've been working with Anne Arundel County in citing some green infrastructure development and where they want to increase and target their land conservation to create their network. And they're using some of our healthy watershed layers as well as some of our diversity dashboard layers to do that. So I think we've got some small examples of success stories. And then beyond that, it's working with our local engagement team to create resources and information so that, you know, those planners and others on the ground have that information when they're ready to, say, write their comp plans every 5 or 10 years, depending upon what schedule they're on. They have resources available to help them write this information in. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but we've definitely thought a lot about that as well. And would be
Yeah, no,
happy to
that's
kind of come back and talk about that as we continue our work as well.
absolutely. And I mean, that's something I think the closest example for me that I can think of is way back in the day working in stormwater permitting and saying, all right, we want people to do low impact development, and in a permit saying, why don't you all update your general plans at some point to incorporate more of this green infrastructure? But then from there, you're right. It's like creating those pathways and the support to make that happen. And it's just really incredible that you guys have those resources to see that through. I know it's challenging, but anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Is the USDA involved in the larger partnership? NRCS has a big Chesapeake Bay funding program targeting agricultural land, and this information could be very useful in targeting actions.
That's a really good point. I think that generally NRCS and USGA are involved in the Bay program from the BMP implementation and tracking side of things. So we have a giant Bay model that helps us track our kind of pollution reduction goals, and the BMPs associated with the USDA data is sort of fed into that, so that states can get credit for the progress that they're making. But I think that you're right. There's an opportunity to better connect that agency with some of the living resources and targeting work. We do track the agricultural lands as part of our protected lands outcomes. So we have a database of, you know, those are part of our protected lands indicator. And when you know, when we display protected lands, those USDA ag easement lands are in there. But I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you.
I think there's also potential for coordinating it with the state agencies too, since one good example is we have an initiative here of planting 5 million trees in Maryland. So the Maryland acting forester has been part of our groups and is very interested in, you know, seeing this data, and it's going to be very useful to them as they're targeting, and a lot of that's on ag lands too.
All right, well, thank you. I think we've reached the point where we promised everyone that we would take a break. So we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 10:50 for our next presentation. Thank you all again. Thank you, Nancy and Renee. It's been awesome.
For having us. We're going to stick around. We're excited for the rest of the day as well. So we're excited to learn from Wisconsin too. Thanks for getting
Awesome.
us
Thank
together.
you.
All right, everybody, it's 10:50, so we're going to go ahead and get started back up. I will kick off the next item. Pamela, are you on? I thought I saw you come in. Okay. So Pamela Toshner is here to talk with us about Wisconsin's Healthy Watersheds and their high quality waters assessment and action plan. Corey talked to this a little bit earlier in the day and kicked things off. So I won't go into too much detail other than to say that we are super excited to have you here, Pamela, to talk about all the good work you are doing in Wisconsin in relation to healthy waters. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you and let us know if you need help sharing screen or any of that type of stuff too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I do think I need some direction on sharing screen.
All right. So I'm not sure what your screen looks like, but there's a little arrow pointing up in a white box.
Oh, yep. Okay.
Share. Okay. You just click that and then it'll give you which screen you want to share on your computer and click and then click share again. I always forget the second share. Did we lose you, Pamela?
You did lose me.
Hey, welcome
Let me
back.
try this again.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Hopefully
in our
that doesn't,
version.
when I hit it, it kicks.
Oh no. I have to say, it's not helpful that the share button is right next to the leave button.
I know. I just saw that too. Yeah. Good design. Do we have our slides, Corey? We could help.
No, but we can get those.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome
That's
back.
the third time's a charm here. I am going to leave my camera off.
Okay.
This is really weird. I hit share and then I get kicked out. Well, let's try it one more time. Thanks for your patience.
No worries. I get it.
Oh, looks like it's working.
Perfect.
Things are
Can
happening.
you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
I got the camera
Awesome.
screwing it up. Well, thank you everybody for inviting me to be here to share Wisconsin's water resources protection story, and specifically I'll dive into the assessment and our action planning. I just want to share that Luke, Renee, and Aaron are our technical and planning leads. They couldn't be here today, but I'm happy to share their slides and all the great work they've done. I will talk a little bit about the background of our program and then share our modeling and assessment work and our action plan and specifically some next steps. The program itself is called Healthy Watersheds, High Quality Waters, but we're also pitching it as the Wonderful Waters of Wisconsin, which is a bit catchier and easier to understand for the public at least. I would like to acknowledge our team listed on the left. We formed in spring 2019, so it's taken us about 3 years to get this far. We've been supported by other Department of Natural Resources staff listed here, as well as external partners. And I just want to highlight that EPA and their contractor Cadmus Group have been really, really helpful as far as our watershed modeling work. Wisconsin is blessed with a tremendous amount of water resources. We have over 86,000 stream miles. We could circle the earth 3 times the equator. We have over 17,000 inland lakes, about 5 million acres of wetlands. Unfortunately, we've lost more than half of our wetlands historically. And we have 650 miles of Great Lake shoreline. So a lot to celebrate and a lot of water to protect. That being said, we know from our Clean Water Act assessment work that over 80% of the water bodies that have been assessed are healthy and in good shape. All too often though, at least in Wisconsin, we hear about, the impaired and polluted waters, blue-green algae blooms. And we've really historically put most of our time, effort, and funding into the restoration side of things. We know from bipartisan research nationally and in Wisconsin and surrounding states that there's a lot of public support for protecting water resources. And most interestingly and recent is just last summer, there was the Nature Conservancy funded some social science research in Wisconsin where over 90% of people said they support protecting land around water to keep water quality and habitat healthy. We also know that there's a lot of tourism money and recreational money invested in the state. Angling and waterfowl hunters alone spend about $2 billion a year. And fortunately, there's recent initiatives related to climate change, environmental justice, and rural prosperity that really dovetail into this work. So we're hoping to seize those initiatives moving forward. And we built some of those features into the model, same as the Chesapeake Bay folks. In Wisconsin and nationally, our historical investment has been restoring impaired waters. And many of you are probably familiar with the EPA guidance that they put out earlier this winter that shared that about 5% of Clean Water Act federal funding goes to protection. So most states are investing in restoration of impaired waters. We try to learn from other states and good examples that are out there, as well as good examples within Wisconsin. And one that kind of rose to the surface for us is Maine, where they have an alternative 9-key element plan for protection purposes, and they more evenly distribute their Clean Water Act funding between restoration and protection. The image is showing where we're at in Wisconsin with our 319 funds. You can see we get about $4 million annually, funding 22 staff and $2 million for projects and other funds. That basically exclusively goes into restoring impaired waters. On the other side of the balance beam there, we have me, 6 times of a staff person, and no dedicated funding. So I am not necessarily suggesting that we move those racks over to the protection side, but we know that there's ways to potentially open up eligibility for some of the federal Clean Water Act funding to do protection work. That would be a simple start to just kind of shuffle the racks around. And that being said, we know there's other funding sources and partnerships and innovative ways to get some of this protection work done. We, similar to California, had a prior healthy watershed assessment experience back from 2011 to 2014. We were one of EPA's pilot healthy watershed assessment states. And there was a big work team that dove deep into the modeling. Unfortunately, after 2014, it just kind of fell flat after the results were available, and there were many reasons for that. And some of them are listed here, but it was important to our team when we got together in 2019 to learn from that past experience and what worked and what didn't work. And one of the big things was we knew the modeling and data set management could be challenging. There were underrepresented resources. We had challenges with scaling. We used the catchment scale back then, and it was a little too complicated for our partners. Some of the data quality was questionable. And perhaps the biggest challenge that we faced the second time around is we couldn't repeat what had been done for the first iteration of our healthy watershed modeling for many reasons. One is simply that like the decisions that went into that 2014 effort weren't really clear and recorded. We also decided we needed to do a better job thinking through messaging, because in the first iteration, people perceived as like good or bad qualities. So we're trying to talk more like healthy and healthiest, and not imply the less healthy watersheds are bad, for example. And we know it's a screening tool, and that over the next 8 years or so, before we update the plan and the model again, we're going to do some field verification work. Another big thing we learned is that we needed to involve more partners early on. So we think we did a pretty good job at that this time. And we need to strive for implementation as an outcome, because after the first assessment effort, we didn't really track implementation. We're not sure that work. So we're going to do a better job for version 2.0. A first task was also to define healthy watershed and high quality water. And for healthy watersheds, we use the EPA's definition, which is here. It's actually quite a bit longer than this, but this is the base definition. And the important thing that resonates with us and is a major driver in the model is that natural land cover is really driving these other processes. As far as high quality waters, we basically landed on a preponderance of evidence needs to show that the water is high quality, and these waters are all monitored. So we have empirical data that would support these 3 criteria listed here for lakes, streams, and rivers. It needs to be a unique or rare resource. It needs to attain state water quality standards, or it needs to have good to excellent biotic integrity. So if a water body, a lake, river, or stream has 2 of those things, we've determined it's a high quality water. We also included wetlands in this effort. We have various wetland programs in Wisconsin, but we don't always do a good job of integrating them with water resource programs. So we've included unique wetlands and wetlands that have the least disturbed reference conditions as high quality waters. Shifting to the modeling and assessment work, we early on we had evaluated many conservation planning tools and data sets, and we spent days kind of going through the data sets and modeling opportunities that existed. This was back in 2019, and we often talked about, too bad we don't have an Uber tool that could integrate all these various data sets and make sure we have the most recent data. And then along came the EPA's Recovery Potential Screening Tool, which is intended for restoration of impaired waters, but we were able to repurpose it for protection purposes and identifying the healthiest waters. And I think the Chesapeake Bay folks, I came on a little late, but we're talking about EPA's Healthy Watershed Assessment data sets and modeling results that they have. So that can be a core indicator in this Recovery Potential Screening Tool. And that's what we used for our ecological index, was the EPA's preliminary healthy watershed assessment, although we were able to customize that with some Wisconsin specific data sets related to wetlands, for example. So this recovery potential screening tool is really nice because you can choose from over 200 metrics that the EPA updates annually, but you can also customize and add your own metrics. We had EPA and contractor support over several years. We probably met quarterly, and they actually developed some climate change indicators with this project in mind. So we were really pleased with this process. And then for us, because we don't have dedicated data scientists to rerun the modeling or sort of start from scratch if we needed to, you can repeat. This has a lot of repeatability and standardized metrics and online tutorials. So that's what we use to do our watershed modeling. And you can see on the right, this is a map of Wisconsin, obviously. I put some major sports teams just for context. The northern part of the state is largely forested, hence the healthiest watersheds in the darkest blue areas. And then you'll see, you know, dark blue here and there elsewhere. Those are also areas where there's a lot of county forest land and natural land cover. And then the lightest yellow are the most urbanized areas or areas with a lot of agriculture. The recovery potential screening tool also includes two other indices. It has a stressor index that you can use, and we did use that for climate change projections, for example, as an indicator, along with historical land use changes and future projected land use changes. And then they have a social index, which we call an opportunity index. And I'll share that map a little later, but we basically integrated Wisconsin DNR program priority areas. So we took our forestry program, priority, ecological landscapes, our wildlife programs, conservation opportunity areas, fisheries, brook trout, environmental resilience reserves, and we could overlay all those program priorities and see where the geographic areas aligned. So potentially we could leverage other programs, funding, staffing, partner groups as we move forward with this effort. The recovery potential screening tool model allows the results to be sorted at multiple scales. The base unit is a HUC 12 watershed, so that's what we use for our primary sort of implementation purposes and the way we share the results. That's on the left here. And it allows the model also provides for sorting the results at those watershed scales. So what you're looking at on the left is Lake Superior Basin, and the model outputs just for Lake Superior Basin. So it ranked the watersheds within that HUC 6 according to the watershed health score. On the flip side, we can zoom out. On the right map, we have the HUC 6s scored statewide throughout Wisconsin. So this is nice. We've kind of landed, well, how we're going to do this within DNR, but partners could certainly go into the viewer. They could even rerun the RPS model and add an indicator or remove one if they wanted to, and sort the results at different scales. As far as high quality waters, again, this analysis was performed only on monitored water bodies, and I previously shared there's these 3 overall criteria categories. On the left is the first. We have unique and rare communities and habitat. Listed here are some examples of the types of water bodies that we looked at. So outstanding and exceptional resource waters, trout streams, wild rice waters, 2-story fishery lakes, and rare wetland types are some examples. As the second criteria category is attaining state water quality standards. I'm assuming folks are familiar with that. And then the third is good and excellent biological conditions. So these are indices of biotic integrity, and each is a little different depending on the water body type. And again, if a water body met 2 of 3 of these criteria bins, it would be listed as a high quality water. Oops, let's see here. Well, we did virtual discussion groups in spring, and I'll get into those a little more, but one of the key themes we heard and asks from partners is to create watershed protection priorities. I think the results are a little overwhelming, and a lot of the areas where the watershed health is lower are already covered by TMDLs and 9 key element plans and that restoration funding. So people wanted us to really highlight the best of the best. And we landed on a 30% protection priority, both statewide, and that's a map you're seeing on the left, the 30% healthiest watersheds in the state. And then we also identify the 30% healthiest within each of those major basins. So at a HUC 6 scale, and that's the map in the middle, that's the Rock River Basin. Madison, Wisconsin is within the Rock River Basin. And you can see in the statewide map that 30% protection priority, no Rock River HUC 12s land in it. But if we look just in the Rock River, we can find the healthiest remaining watersheds. And people asked for this because they were concerned the program would be just sort of a northern Wisconsin, heavily forested area protection program, and they wanted to be able to work to save or protect the healthiest watersheds remaining in more urbanized and agricultural landscapes. After we identify our protection priorities, we then identify the high quality waters within them. So on the top right is a HUC 12 zoomed out, and that's in the top 10% healthiest for the Rock River Basin. And you can see within it, these highlighted, there's 3 highlighted streams that are high quality waters. There's a little lake in the top right, and then there's several yellow polygons or dots, and those are high quality wetlands. The RPS tool also allows us to determine a watershed protection potential, and we're not this far yet. We'll probably evaluate this and experiment with it over the next few years, and when we update our action plan closer to 2030, see if this is, if it's been field verified and valid as far as sort of the opportunity aspects especially. But what this is, it's the watershed health, so the ecological indicator on the left, and then you add the opportunities or social indicators, and then remove the vulnerability, so minus the vulnerability or stressor score. And we have a watershed protection potential map. The darkest blues would have the most protection potential, meaning they're essentially the healthiest with a lot of partners and other program opportunities, and the most resilient. As far as data display, I would love to get to where the Chesapeake Bay partners are at. We're kind of limping along in that direction. We have a watershed restoration and protection viewer that's on the top left here. So a person could go in, highlight a watershed, Huck 12, for example, and know if it's a geographic priority area statewide, or within a Huck 6 basin, or both. They can also identify high quality waters within the given watershed, and we're just baseline right now providing the ecological health score with the watershed. Ideally, it would be nice down the road to be able to have sort of the report out for the watersheds and the water bodies, share more of the indicator results, like the Chesapeake Bay folks had done, but we're not quite there yet. We can toggle on and off the various watershed indicators, though, through the menu on the left. And we're working on sort of the content and user guide for this piece, right? I'm anticipating we are going to need to do a lot of training to help partners understand the assessment results. We also created Huck 6 dashboards. These are in PDF format, but we would like to get to the point where they are online and a little more interactive. But for now, they're on paper. So for each watershed, each Huck 6, we identify the top 30% healthiest watersheds. We've included the ecological health score as well as the protection priority score, and then a count of high quality water bodies within that watershed. That's in the table, and it's also displayed in the map. And then the final data display piece is specific to high quality waters, and it's by county. So all the counties in Wisconsin, we've listed out the high quality waters in alphabetical order. And then there's this priority watershed column that would identify if they're statewide or Huck 6 priorities or both. We're anticipating some partners, again, like counties and regional planning commissions, would likely use this information sort of for their own purposes, almost independent of the statewide program. So we try to provide the data, thinking through multiple ways how partners may use it. Shifting gears to the action plan, I shared that we've been doing the modeling and assessment work basically since 2019. In spring of 2021, we drafted a kickoff strategy, which I'll share in a moment. And the kickoff strategy basically bridges to our internal strategic plan. And then we use that kickoff strategy to just create awareness that we're doing this, but we also really used it to engage potential partners in discussion groups. And we spent about 4 months doing virtual discussion groups. I'll cover that too. And now we're in this action plan launch phase. We just posted the action plan to our website last month and are reaching back out to partners as we move forward towards implementation. Similar to the Chesapeake Bay example, our overall goal is 100% of the healthy watersheds and high quality waters remain so through 2030. Early on in 2019, our team was a little bit challenged with understanding our mission. And fortunately, simultaneously to that, our program leaders drafted a water quality program strategic plan, and the first goal was to develop a statewide water resources program. So that really helped us because it provided direction. The strategic plan included the 4 objectives you see here related to technical assistance, funding, program tools, and awareness. And our team basically lifted that internal strategic plan and created a kickoff strategy, as I mentioned before, just to make folks aware that we're creating a statewide water resources program. And we also used it as a springboard for our discussion groups. We put right in the kickoff strategy the types of questions that we asked at the virtual discussion groups. So this little mid-step was really helpful for us to sort of have some credibility within our own agency, but also to build credibility for the effort by reaching out to partners with a kickoff strategy. We hosted 8 virtual discussion groups via Zoom, and we had over 160 participants representing 93 organizations, and we had about 90 pages of notes. Those organizations ran the gamut from EPA Region 5 and headquarters staff to other states joined a couple of them. We had elected officials, several statewide conservation organizations, and probably the most well-attended groups were the government groups, so state, county, federal, and local government. And we asked the questions that you see listed on the right, the 6 questions. The first 2, we just wanted to get a better sense of the protection work that was already happening and learn from success stories and lessons learned. And we also wanted to be sure we understood how people would use the results. The next 4 questions, 3 to 6, were specific to the objectives in that internal strategic plan and also the current program. So we wanted to talk about how can we work together on technical assistance, what kind of funding opportunities are out there, what tools already exist that we could repurpose for protection purposes, and how do we increase external awareness. We had a top 10 themes we heard. These didn't translate directly into actions. 5 of those top 10 themes are here, but overall people were really jazzed and excited to do this. There was no opposition, so that was very reassuring. We got a reality check. I think most of us already know this, but that in order for it to be successful, it's all about community, 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 and that we need to get into these protection priority areas and work with partners in the public. And sometimes DNR might not even be sort of suited to take the lead in certain situations. We also heard that people did not want this to be a regulatory program, at least not to begin with. We've had a lot of our environmental protections have been scaled back over the last 10 to 15 years or so, and there's frustration with that. And there's also frustration with the perceived lack of enforcement of the protections that are in place now. So it's not to say down the road we wouldn't shift to regulatory actions, but we're not going to kick it off that way. Geographic priorities were widely supported, and the time is now. People really want to see protection become an equal partner to the restoration work we've been doing. The action plan itself is aspirational, so it's not a work plan. It's not even a DNR plan. We wrote it in a way that we recognize the huge input of partners and the partnerships that we'll need to leverage to make things successful. And as I mentioned, sometimes some of the actions aren't even ones that the DNR would necessarily take on. we included 25 actions sorted by those 4 major objectives. And basically, if a majority of the partner groups on the bottom suggested it, it made it into the action plan. There was some really kind of strong feedback on what we should be doing. And then we suggested strategies for implementation, again, drawing heavily from the partner groups. One of our challenges is there's some uncertainty with this. It's still difficult, I think, for people to grasp like what protection is. And there's kind of that, if people need a crisis often to react to it, and then they know what to do. But protecting natural land cover, for example, isn't a real tangible thing to some partner groups in the public. So we took this staged approach with our action plan, that there's things we can do now really related to the modeling and assessment work and building the viewer and training folks on those results. Then we have these next steps that will depend on sort of those first now steps. And then we identified for the future activities. And a lot of these would almost, well, not a lot, some of them would require executive or legislative action. So we've been asking ourselves lately, what does success look like? And I'm just going to run through a couple of the objectives and example actions right from our action plan. But we know we're going to need to establish formal opportunities to coordinate and implement the action plan. And we know we need to train other programs and partners. Success in that realm would look like, across programs and DNR and external partners coming together to work on some of the priority actions and work identified in the plan. So related to technical assistance, funding, and communications. Success would also look like dedicated or adapted funding to support staff and partners who are really enthusiastic about moving the needle forward on water resources protection in Wisconsin. As far as our second objective, which is to leverage and adapt existing program tools to achieve results, we'd like to see these results be integrated into other statewide planning efforts. And the projects listed here, like the Land Acquisition Plan, Wisconsin Wildlife and Forestry Action Plans, are all DNR related plans, but we'd also like to see partners integrated into their regional, county, and even lake and river management plans. This map I described earlier on the right, this is a really cool thing that came out of this effort, regardless of the Healthy Watersheds program, but we now have a map that integrates multiple DNR program priorities, so we can see where there's resources, potentially funding, and partners to prioritize work in the future. So in other words, if our forestry division was, was looking to do reforestation, for example, in certain parts of the state, we might be able to leverage our water resources grant funding to work with them on protecting or restoring that natural land cover. As far as utilizing funding for water resources protection, which is the third objective in our action plan, we would like to balance current Clean Water Act federal funding sources. And the simplest way to do that is in Wisconsin, we could expand the eligible activities to include protection activities. Some of you may have seen this guidance that EPA put out, I think, earlier this winter. But these yellow box activities are eligible activities per EPA using Clean Water State Revolving Fund and 319 funds. And as an example, we could potentially use that funding for land acquisition for watershed protection, but we don't right now. In the state of Wisconsin, we're not using, we have no protection-based activities that are eligible for funding. So we just, within the state, need to determine that we will do that. That being said, there's other opportunities for funding out there that we haven't historically looked at. An example is the U.S. Forest Service landscape scale restoration funding. And again, working with other programs like forestry, that's an appealing opportunity in the future. So overall, we would like to look at implementation funding through this innovative lens of what could be instead of the way we've always done it. As far as next steps, we are pivoting to implementation, and we are asking ourselves what that looks like. That was those prior slides too, like what do these actions really look like as far as success? We're further refining those 4 major objective areas, and 3 of them specifically, we're going to reach out to partners again, just to help us dive a little deeper in the technical assistance, BMPs, funding, and communications. We are also developing a training plan to teach partners how to use the modeling and assessment results. That, again, was one of our major barriers with the last Healthy Watershed Assessment effort, is that people just gave up because they couldn't figure out the results. And then we want to take some of those success stories and good water resource protection examples that we heard through our discussion groups and translate them into case studies that can be more easily shared, so people can learn from each other and apply similar projects in their local communities. Just a note that we have a Healthy Watersheds, High Quality Waters website. If you Google HWHQW, it pops up right away. It's a big acronym, but it's not a common one. And all the resources that I've explained today are on there, including a technical report that goes into much more detail on our modeling and assessment work. And then we also have on the bottom left here, this little red envelope, a email listserv or subscription service that you can sign up for to stay in the loop on future communications. It's very low volume and specific to this program type communications. And with that, I'm done. I put Frances McDormand on here because when I talk, people are often reminded of the movie Fargo. But Aaron Marty is my major counterpart here. He is our current technical lead. So I want to give him a lot of credit for the modeling and assessment work. And I wish he could be here with us today, but maybe next time. And with that, I will pause.
Yeah, this was amazing, Pamela. Thank you so much for that. I'm definitely feeling, I'm over here texting Corey back and forth of how inspired I am to move things along in California. I mean, you guys, it's really impressive just how, and I know there's challenges, but it just seems really well coordinated across so many partners in Wisconsin, which I think is something that we kind of struggle with in California. You know, this Healthy Watersheds partnership, for example, it's a voluntary effort. And I think one thing that keeps coming to mind, both with your talking earlier with Renee and Nancy, is it sounds like, you know, taking more of a non-regulatory approach might be more effective in many ways. But I wonder in both of your situations, kind of like a regulatory driver that exists. So I'm thinking specifically of like biological criteria, or you also have definitions of high quality waters and ONRWs. And for those that are not in water quality world, these are all terms through the Clean Water Act that help to define what we mean by a healthy watershed or a healthy water. So I guess my question to you all is, do you think that the progress that you've made to date would be possible without kind of that regulatory driven foundation?
This is Pamela. Yeah, I do think so. And I think sometimes that the regulatory context of the Clean Water Act actually limits us because it's where people go to right away in their heads, at least within our agency. And they that sort of status quo restoration of impaired waters thing is a hard nut to crack, and I don't know that we're going to be able to do that. And I'm personally moving towards other like funding sources and partner groups as a more viable alternative. So I think like Minnesota, for example, they are doing forested watershed conservation for deep water, 2-story Cisco lakes. They call them telebes. But they're doing that almost totally independent of any Clean Water Act related stuff, and they're getting a lot done. So I think this started off under sort of the Clean Water Act and the anti-degradation piece, but I think we'll be more successful with different partners and innovative funding, at least at this point. But that's a good question to see over the next year or so.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's super helpful. And here in California too, they're, with everything that's happening with climate change and trying to adapt to that, wildfires throughout the forested parts of California, there is a lot of opportunity there as far as funding goes. But I think the design sprint I mentioned earlier is an example of that. Like, how do we take all the available data and information to assess conditions so we can start being a little bit more effective in implementation of these protection actions or whatever it may be. So anyways, all of that said, I think we're still trying to wrap our brains around the best way to approach this, but hearing the examples of the work that you guys have done is incredibly insightful and invaluable work. So thank you both. Thank you all. So Corey, I think we have like discussion time, right? That's what we're doing now at this point.
Yeah, unless other people have any questions for Pamela, you can always put those in the chat, or if you want to raise hands, that's totally fine too. But yeah, otherwise, I was hoping that we could get into a discussion of kind of what we've learned today, what, for our partners that have thankfully like stayed on the call from Chesapeake and from Wisconsin, like what questions they might have for us, like their sticking points as well. And again, all of this is within the context of trying to protect healthy water. So what you all know from your programs within and outside of the water boards, all of that context is really needed and welcomed. So yeah, Allie, maybe we can kick it off.
Sure. Yeah, I threw this question your way, Pamela, and kind of curious to hear from you, Renee and Nancy too, just as far as those, like if, in your opinion, if you did not have, I know Clean Water Act it can get in the way at times, right? But do you think without, like if you did not have biological criteria in place, or you didn't have those clear definitions, which I know they're different across different agencies, but some definition of high quality waters, tier 2 waters, etc. Do you think you'd be where you are today with the progress that you've made? So same question that I just asked Pamela, but for Renee and Nancy, if you two have thoughts on that.
I think I was really writing down some of the things in terms of the connection and overlap and missed opportunities within the Clean Water Act regulation, and how, I think that we're a great example of those are also missed opportunities in the Chesapeake for the most part. Whenever I try to explain healthy watersheds to other folks in other silos of the Bay program, especially the water quality folks, I often get back like, you guys can't do anything without like more teeth. You need to somehow like link into existing regulations in order to make progress. And so I think, being an environmental scientist and having a background in land use planning, that water quality is also not my forte. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to kind of better integrate those efforts. And I really like this idea of, you know, being equitable with our conservation dollars. I think that is sort of an interesting way that we could think about, you know, making sure that we're putting investments into preserving high quality landscapes and these watersheds, in addition to the regulatory requirements we have for restoring declined waters. Sorry, my brain's not tired. It's the afternoon here. Give me a break. But I think the other piece of it too is that, you know, we've got some additional federal funding coming down the pike through the infrastructure bill and America the Beautiful, and the Chesapeake is, you know, well aligned with our conservation efforts. We have a Chesapeake Conservation Partnership, and I think that there's some opportunities to be strategic about how we spend those dollars within our healthy watershed. So I think there's other sort of you know, opportunity, especially working with our tribes in Virginia. A lot of the new requirements are encouraging better partnerships with tribal leaders, and we actually have a new member from the Upper Mattaponi tribe on our team in the Healthy Watershed. So, you know, I think we're kind of looking at various approaches on how we can better leverage existing efforts, regulatory efforts, as well as federal funding programs. But I think we're all struggling, and we should keep talking about this.
Yeah, and what comes to mind too is I think there are limits to, you know, what the regulations can do too. And I've heard our Tier 2 coordinator in Maryland say, you know, they get a chance to review things right before the bulldozers are coming. But what she would really like to be doing is working with the county planners and getting some of these protections in place, you know, overlay zones, or, you know, broader riparian setbacks, or other types of more proactive measures to kind of get ahead of this all and really protect things before it gets to the 11th hour. So, but I think this is so multifaceted, and the number of different groups are involved. I mean, it's really interesting to see what's going on in Wisconsin, and all the NGOs and others who can really make a difference and use information in a lot of different ways. So it's not just a, you know, one approach or one size fits all kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Which kind of along those lines, it was really interesting to see, Pamela, how in the action plan it kind of pointed to, like, you know, who could potentially take the lead on this, because it's not necessarily just one agency, and not to say that that person or that group would take the lead, but like, you know, acknowledging that this is probably within the scope of X, Y, and Z. You know, I think that isn't always discussed with our efforts in California. It's just sort of like who's here to move this forward and who's interested, but we don't have everybody at the table. And so having like a more strategic, thoughtful plan like that and laying it all out would help us, I think, to talk to the right people and make some of this good work advance. So I'm going to shush because I see a question from Nick in the chat. Nick, did you want to chime in with your question?
Sure. Yeah, I had a question just along these lines. Like, have either of you utilized the 305B report? I know it doesn't have the teeth of the 303D list, but it's, you know, part of the integrated report where you identify Category 1 waters. And if you have, I heard Nancy talk about if you have 2 of the 3 kind of indicators, you were classified as a high quality water. You know, that in my mind kind of could be like a weight of evidence for putting something into a Category 1 water body. And I was wondering if either of you have leveraged like a Category 1 categorization and had that impact things like an environmental impact report, you know, for a project. Like if we had a list of Category 1 water bodies in my mind, and that was out there and published, and then there were projects proposed, that would be like a key point of evidence I would want to see in like a CEQA type of planning effort or of a project that could be leveraged that may have some sort of teeth. Just wondering if you thought about that.
Right. I think in the Bay states, it goes back to that list that Renee showed of how the states are defining their high quality waters. And, you know, that's been a state decision using, in some cases, biological data, using other types of information they've put things on lists and that provide some of that protection. I think where the intersection is maybe the information we have could contribute to some of those listing decisions too. We've looked at that in some ways. There are places not every healthy watershed has already been listed, so there's always an opportunity to improve upon those lists, and then to use this information to protect those waters. I know that the Tier 2 program here has been effective in protecting some things like cold water streams when there's potential for warm water releases. MDE's weighed in on some of those decisions to say, well, no, this is a brook trout water, it's a Tier 2, and has been able to condition permits and have other commenting abilities when some regulatory decisions come up. I don't have a great one example for you, but I do know that that's one type of case that's worked well here.
Yeah, I think Maryland's probably the only state that has started to get at that through their integrated reporting methods and their water quality or their watershed implementation plans. And I think, I was just reminding myself what it is. Like, I'm not a water quality person, and I think that we're missing some of those key kind of translator partners, I guess, is where they would kind of fit into our our partnership framework. It's a good reminder. Thank you.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, we have exceptional and outstanding resource waters that have been identified, and we included those as one of those categories within the high quality waters. So our current high quality waters are probably even more high quality than the exceptional and outstanding resource waters, which are currently codified and regulated. We kind of put a placeholder in the most recent water quality report to Congress for the program and identifying that these could be considered for future purposes as high quality waters, or even redo the outstanding resource water list. But we don't have real direct or specific plans to make that happen. Part of the reason why is because we'd have to, there's a risk in going back and opening up that administrative code right now in the state of Wisconsin. So we would like to do that down the road, but we're not sure it's worth the risk of losing the protections that we do have.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, Pamela. I was wondering, and maybe Allie or Nick or someone that has more institutional history with the water boards and watersheds can talk a little bit more about what an equivalent for California, like when Pamela references the protections that we do have, if we just kind of briefly outline what those are from our side as well.
We have two. We have two outstanding natural resource waters.
Yeah.
And that's Lake Tahoe and Mono Lake.
Okay.
Lake Tahoe is very developed. I mean, there's houses all around it. They'll keep Tahoe blue, so I guess it's got some protections. But I mean, if you got enough money, you can build a house on it. And then Mono Lake is a fish habitat, but there's some tribal lands there, and there's agriculture all around that. So it's kind of they're there, and we one of the tools actually the Healthy Watersheds Partnership, and Alec knows more about it than I do, that was developed. We were trying to add some ONRW waters, some rivers, and we developed a tool to help with that, which is actually might be of interest to some of these other state partners to see how Region 1 did that. I'm blanking on his name. We developed
it's
it.
Lance. Yeah, I don't know if he's on the call still, but that is no longer, I think it got put on hold. But yeah, I mean, Nick's right. We have 2 ONRWs that have been designated, but we don't have a standardized process across California to define how regions would go about designating an ONRW. We don't have, I just checked in on this with some staff just to double check. So I'm like, have we done any protective actions outside of a designation? And there's not really anything in place. I mean, I think like Pamela was alluding to, we're pretty heavy on the Clean Water Act implementation for impaired water bodies and focusing our efforts there. But as far as establishing protective actions, that's not something that we've really done yet. I know there's interest and there's a lot of energy around it and momentum to go that way, but it's just not quite there. So I don't, Mike Hanks is on the line. I'm gonna, not to call you out, Mike, but I know like in the 319 non-point source program, as part of their 5-year implementation plan, I think it's called, there is talk about, you know, putting that grant funding towards protective actions. So and it references the Healthy Watersheds Partnership assessment tool as a way to like use those results to help prioritize where that grant funding could go. That's what we got right now, at least from the Water Board's perspective. And I don't know other agencies or partners where they're at, but there's an overall recognition of how important it is, but seeing the work get done is another thing. We've got a long ways to go.
And we're working, I mean, I saw the EPA guidance on the integrated report does put an emphasis on protection and those other, the 305B portions of it. So maybe with that recognition, maybe with EPA kind of calling that out, saying, because I think one of the biggest things I heard, especially when I was managing the integrated report assessment process, was like, we can't deal with the things that are impaired, like stop adding to the list. And, you know, there's a comment in there about money. It's easier to justify restoration or fixing an impairment. And I guess I feel like that's flawed logic, because I feel like if you protect a water body that you know is important, rather than letting it get impaired and then trying to throw millions of dollars to restore it, that's a fool's errand. So I feel like it's a net savings to protect, recognizing that people are always looking to expand. So it's difficult, but maybe with EPA kind of expanding it, and then we made a concerted effort in California. We didn't have a category 1, you know, for years, because we made it so hard to get into it. You said that you had to, you know, be assessed for every single beneficial use. And so we kind of shifted our process. We started listing our reference watershed water bodies on that we use for our biological integrity. We have one region that's got biological objectives. I think the state's looking at that. You know, if we got biological objectives statewide, that would be a tool that would give us something other than a narrative objective to enforce fresh and cold water habitat. That would be useful. The mechanisms are there, and you know, some regions have just said, you know, we're tired of waiting, so we're going to do that, which is great. I think it's the first step to lay the groundwork. I'm curious to see how that works in San Diego, because that's probably more in line with some of the political leanings of some of the other states that are kind of more half and half, or more even conservative leaning. San Diego is more in that line. I don't know if Michael's on the line or not.
He is, but he might be feeling shy. I don't know. And along those lines, just before so the San Diego region too had been exploring what an ONRW process might look like for them. And I think they're they're a little bit more well suited to go down that path, because they do have biological criteria and other ways to say, like, you know, define these are healthy waters. But I don't know where they stand with that. I think it was just mostly, you know, exploring that option, but nothing really real quite yet.
Yeah, I do want to mention some of my colleagues have actually worked with the city of San Diego, and some with the Water Board too, and looking at developed a causal assessment tool for the impaired waters, but also a resource protection and prioritization tool. So starting to use some of that, you know, same kind of approach of taking all the data you can for watershed scale information and using that in prioritization way. So definitely making some steps there.
Well, totally. And acknowledging too that California is gigantic and incredibly diverse. And, you know, San Diego in itself is that area is complex. So it's good progress being made down there and in other parts of the state. But when I'm saying these things, it's also coming from State Water Board, the entire state perspective. So that's not to say that there aren't examples of good work that are being done out there, but you know, I think as the entire state goes, we do definitely have some work to do to establish a more consistent framework. And then Wendy, I see in the comments in the chat here, just, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on that, but just talking to the challenge with some of these protection actions. Did you want to chime in, or I'm happy just to read your chat if you want to stay there.
Yeah, I'm not sure if my mic is but yeah, just working at an agency that is non-regulatory, we're often pressed to sort of show outcomes, and one of the easier to show outcomes when there's stuff to count, and so making progress toward a TMDL standard is one of those things that is that impresses the people who write our budgets. Whereas if you are working in headwaters, you can't say we prevented 10,000 acres of wildfire, right? You can say that you spend a lot of money on forest health, and that's doing really good things for the watershed, but it's less of a sort of a piece that really drives the funding and drives the decision makers to put money where their mouth is, and do the kinds of things that would protect watersheds and water quality. So that's all my comment was really about.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think something that we all kind of struggle with, and I don't know if maybe Pamela and Renee and Nancy, if you guys had any experience with that and helping to justify some of these more protective actions. And I think I know the answer. You also are struggling with that same issue, but maybe where you have been able to put some protective actions forth, how that came to be, if what support you had or any justification for more protective actions that you guys used.
I think we've gotten as far as tracking protected lands and looking at protection opportunities, and working on how best to communicate that information. And I think when we start talking about protections in the Bay program, we usually are talking about land conservation and perpetuity through fee or easement. But of course, we all know that there's lots of other ways that we can protect land through zoning, through watershed management plans, other federal agency agreements like, CREP programs and things like that. And so, I think it's almost about first defining what those protections are and which ones, in terms of, effectiveness for watershed health. And then it's about kind of communicating that, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I feel like with this next phase of our healthy watershed assessment, more confidence in our data and having 2 years of high resolution land use land change data, that we're going to have a lot more of the science and information to be able to identify where protections are lacking, and where actions need to be taken. And depending upon the vulnerability, we might be able to kind of categorize what types of protections might be needed depending upon that vulnerability. So I think those are the directions that we're likely headed.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I wonder for Wendy, if from NRCS perspective, would it be helpful like to have, I mean, what in your mind do you think would be helpful to communicate to decision makers that these protective actions are needed and they should be supported. Like, would an assessment dashboard and that data and science to support those decisions, to show it's important to be proactive in watershed protection? Or do you have any thoughts on your needs and
Yeah,
what could be
I mean,
beneficial?
I think from the natural resources perspective, we all understand that those protection measures are really important. And just from the perspective of the agency sort of being able to point to successes, I think the partnership from my point of view, um, I would really love to be strengthening partnerships with the state agencies and tapping into, you know, the priorities of the state, because that is actually pretty powerful from the from my bosses, right? If I say, you know, we know what the state's priorities are, we are working towards those by doing these actions in these watersheds that the state has identified, you know, with their data, superior data analysis processing, but basically saying that we're trying to work towards identified priorities, and whether those are driven by a regulation, a TMDL, or whether they're driven by watershed protection, I think those partnerships between the federal agencies and the state agencies really do carry weight.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. And I'd be happy to chat with you more about this offline and to help. I don't know what your relationships are currently with the water boards, but help make those connections with you. And again, I think there's definitely overlap with the 319H program and some of the work being done there through our grant funding. But yeah, if there was like a shared kind of prioritization process across our agencies, that definitely helps from our end too, to say like, look, we're all working together. It's all the same resource we're trying to protect. And then, you know, funneling additional funding towards those projects also helps, right, with implementation. So let's chat more. Yeah. Excited to connect with
I
you.
would
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Okay.
I do have to sign off. I'm sorry to leave the
Oh, no
conversation.
worries. No worries. Thanks, Wendy. And then Corey, it looks like you had some thoughts. Did you want to chime in?
I mean, yeah, I was just thinking about Renee's comment about working with BULED and like fee and other easements. Like, I know, you know, there are conservation groups down here in San Diego that kind of do that work as well, but like I haven't run into them within my experience at the state board yet. And so I think, I don't know, I think sometimes I think I particularly on the like the, you know, assessment dashboard level, like I'm thinking very high level state stuff. And then a lot of this protection, you know, and it seems like it's also what's happening with Pamela's group in Wisconsin too. Like a lot of the protection stuff can happen on like this on this more local municipal even level, that we're just not, we haven't like built those connections yet. And I think, yeah, I guess maybe this ends up being like, you know, somewhat of a question for Pamela and Nancy and Renee, like how did you have to start building those connections? Were those already there? You know, how do you identify, or have you used that to identify where you want to go with this? Yeah. Greg mentioned that CNRA, which is our natural resources agency here in California, does track conservation easements. So that could be a good place for us to start too. Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to chime in on that a little bit more too, it's Department of Fish and Wildlife, so same within that same umbrella, does a lot of kind of land acquisition, grant funding. So we're doing it at state agency level, but it's not the water boards necessarily. I mean, we don't do conservation easements, but the benefits of those type of protective actions, as we all know, there's obviously water quality benefits too. So yeah, we all need to come together somehow. So I'm gonna go back, like you said, to Pamela and Renee and to Corey's question, like, how are you doing this? How were those connections made? And be interested to learn more.
Yeah, so again, I think because of the existing kind of outcome silos and partnerships that have been created, the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership is a large landscape level cooperative with leaders at the National Park Service as well as the Chesapeake Conservancy. And so there's sort of a unique federal-private partnership, and the leader of the Conservancy, Joel Dunn especially, has been a champion on this effort. He's worked with the Rappahannock tribes in getting them some historic lands transferred back to them. That was a recent success. And just really one of those kind of movers and shakers who knows all the senators, knows how to lobby, knows really well our science and work, and is an amazing advocate on our behalf. And I think that, you know, identifying who those champions are in your region who can kind of help carry the torch is sort of a really important piece. My role as a data technical person, and I maintain the protected lands data set, gives me direct connection to all of the data providers that maintain protected lands data sets across the watershed. And then I also have the opportunity annually to present and work with those folks at their annual meeting at the Chesapeake Conservation Partnership meeting. And so I think a lot of our early work has really been about the overlap between their vital lands that they've identified for farm, forest, heritage, habitat, and health. So they sort of have their own priorities. And we bring those in because we've built our systems and our GIS data layers to be overlapping. We bring them in and we look at co-benefits and areas that we can further leverage each other's work. And that's kind of been the way. I mean, are there more opportunities? Are there ways to kind of leverage these federal dollars coming in? Definitely. But I think really you can't just create something new. You need to knit into what's already there and make those partnerships and connections, I think, is probably the best advice I would have on that subject.
Yeah, and for us in Wisconsin, I would say the most enthusiastic partners are potentially land trusts and people doing permanent land protection because they've wanted the data and the science for years, and now we have it to share with them, and we're certainly not going to tell them how to prioritize land purchases or anything like that, but I think they've been more or less asking for this information, so I see them rising to the top as a key partner. And we're fortunate we have a statewide land trust partner called Gathering Waters. That's like an umbrella organization for, I think there's 43 individual land trusts, and Gathering Waters has been really supportive of the effort. So I think down the road, we'll continue to work with them. A specific example is there isn't a permanent land protection toolkit in the state, or within individual land trusts might have something like that, but there isn't really a go-to place or resource for property owners who might want to permanently protect their land. And to me, that's a partnership opportunity to build that. And then the other interesting thing that we have going on is there is, on some of these individual water bodies, there is a growing body of evidence that the individual property owners have the capacity, whether it's their experience like in marketing or in banking before they retired, and they have funds and access to fundraising efforts. So I see that as a real opportunity where if we follow that community lead and go and work locally with partners, or they work with each other, we know they can raise the money and find partners to protect some of those lands.
Yeah, no, and to your point that the land trust, I mean, it is really helpful information for them to know from agency perspective of which areas are important for protection. I mean, that kind of brings to mind way back in the day when I worked in mitigation banking, and a lot of the mitigation banking firms were like, it'd be cool if Fish and Wildlife had some guidance of which areas are important to you all for species protection, because that also helps them out, because it's also ensuring a model for them that's going to work, right? That these are resources that we want to protect in perpetuity. But I think that can be said across all of our agencies, just fill in the blank of the resource that you have jurisdiction over. But as far as, working more closely with land trusts, it's not really something that, at least speaking for the water boards, that we have done as much. But others may have more experience with that, maybe in natural resource agencies, et cetera. And thank you, Renee, just seeing that you got to jump off, but amazing work as always, and we'll follow up. So I guess that actually brings to mind time check. How are we doing? It's 12:05. I think we have a few more minutes for discussion. So if anyone else wants to chime in and share thoughts on this or any questions, I think I'm going to open it back up. Looks like Carol had some thoughts on bringing in flood districts within the partnership, which is a great suggestion. And also GSAs, which can you maybe put in the chat or chime in? What is that, a groundwater sustainability
agency?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so across
yeah.
California, right, the Sigma created all of these new kind of conglomerations of agencies. Sometimes the GSA is one body in an area, and sometimes it's multiple groups that have come together per like an MOU to work together, but they've had to identify groundwater dependent ecosystems. So I think it's important that those also be protected in some way. And the GSA is already going to do that from a groundwater perspective. They're going to ensure that, the water is available for these, areas. But as far as protecting them from other types of encroachment, that's not necessarily happening.
Yeah, great point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing other groups that, maybe we should be thinking about and reaching out to. And maybe as a last wrap up point or question for, looks like Nancy's still here and Pamela, are there any people or agencies that, that were in that you kind of wished you had brought in earlier into your assessment and implementation process, or anything that you would have changed about how you worked with those partners?
That's a good question. Well, interestingly enough, I think our watershed staff should have been brought in. We did engage them, but they didn't really bite, and that's our Clean Water Act folks. And we're working with them now, and it's a very positive thing, but it's just interesting that that's where you think they'd be at the core of the effort. And it's mostly because our agency has been sort of reorganized in a way that it's very difficult to collaborate across programs. So it's no person's fault or anything like that. It's just more difficult to tap certain people. And one thing that we did do that I'm glad we did, which is similar to what you're doing, is we looked to other states and efforts out there. For example, I remember going through all the Chesapeake Bay information, and I think I've been in touch with Renee, maybe it was, but we talked with Kentucky and Minnesota and a lot with EPA, and that helped a lot. Like, we felt pretty solid that we had covered the ground on the protection work that was already done throughout the country.
Awesome. So we're on the right track then.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that the same people and projects are here, and Michigan is now embarking on this, so they probably would love to be part of future conversations too.
And I think on the partnership things, Corey, if I can speak for Renee, she's the coordinator of the goal implementation team that's surrounded around healthy watershed maintenance. And that's a nice structure. That group meets regularly and has been following the progress of this technical, but they also have other projects that are involving, promoting protection in the 7 jurisdictions of the Bay, and includes representation from the Land Trust Alliance. And she has the strong ties with Chesapeake Conservancy and others. I think that some of the Bay program gets also include more local government participation. So I think that might be something that we might think of expanding in the future, since so much of those land use decisions are made at the local level.
Absolutely, they totally are. Yeah, and Nick piped in that it could be a cool session for us to have at the 13th annual National Monitoring Conference, which is next year, I believe, on the East Coast. Is that right, Nick? Something like that.
It's close to. It's very. They haven't publicly announced it, but it's probably most likely going to be Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yeah, it could be cool.
The other resource, and some of you, if not all of you, may be familiar with it, the Environmental Law Institute did like a review of state and tribal protection programs, and they have a really nice website highlighting what the various states are up to. So that has been helpful.
Yeah, I just saw that, and I think I shared that with you too, Corey, but I wasn't aware, and it's such a great resource, and has actually been helpful in our outreach, which states are doing what, and how we can start trying to connect those dots and collaborate with you all and others. But yeah, I think we're getting close to the end here for wrap up. So I'm going to start down that path. But I just wanted to thank Nancy and Pamela again for all the incredible work you're doing, for being here today and sharing your stories. We appreciate it. And I know personally, I've been like scribbling down notes of inspiration, and I've learned so much from you all. So I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future and kind of talking through some of this stuff a little bit more. And then just real quickly, Carol, do we have a legislative advocate that has the ear of a legislator or two? Is that a question for us, or I'm guessing that's towards Nancy and or Pamela?
Right.
I think from Chesapeake. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy. Sorry.
I was going to say some of that happens at a level that's a little above where I am in the technical trenches of the Bay program, but I know there is there's a committee of partners that gets together at a high level. It includes state delegates, senators, that sort of thing, as well as there's a governor's committee that gets together, and these are looking at overarching Bay issues, but certainly healthy watersheds, as you saw from that very first chart Renee had, is part of this larger effort. So I think there's opportunities to sort of work through the networks and the channels that are already established and get healthy watershed on the agenda there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we had national and state elected officials or their staff represented in our discussion groups, but we don't have a direct advocate out there. And I'd say it's similar to what Nancy described. There may be, things going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware of. Our legislature is out of session right now. We do plan when they return though to meet with some of them, just purely to bring awareness to the program, see what happens from there.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, so in these last couple of minutes then, we will just going to wrap things up. We've got notes that we were taking. We've recorded the meeting. We'll make all of that available. If Nancy and Pamela and Renee are okay with sharing slides, we'll also post those and make those available on the Healthy Watersheds portal page. And as we do, we'll follow up in the next week or so with the notes and supporting materials. So you all have those for reference. And Corey, any last thoughts from you?
No, I'm just so thankful that you all were able to make the time to be here today. We're learning so much as we're trying to get through everything. I mean, we had, starting conversations, and I've still got so many questions and I'm so excited. So yeah, thank you all so much for your time, and thanks everyone who could be here too.
Yeah, thanks for including us. This has been really exciting and interesting. I'm learning a lot too.
Same here. Thank you very much. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you all, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all.